A very good morning to you. So how serious is this problem? How badly does it affect South Africa? In other words, how much illicit dumping has been happening on our shores, if any?
Well, good morning. I think to date this hasn't really been an issue on our agenda that we've had to worry about. I think certainly in the rest of Africa, we've seen for many, many years in West Africa, in countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, there's been a big influx of particularly things like electronic waste, hazardous waste being dumped in those regions. I think we're probably fortunate being at the tip of the continent, that it's a little bit far removed from a lot of the developed countries, and perhaps that has saved us to date. And I think that's allowed us to focus on developing our own secondary resources economy. But I think certainly, given the pushback that we see now from South and Southeast Asia, returning waste back to Europe, for example, I think this is something that we certainly need to be aware of going forward.
So are we in danger that South Africa might become a target for these illegal dumpers?
I think absolutely. I think every country in Africa and probably every coastal country in Africa is at risk of perhaps this waste being diverted back to Africa, looking for a place to dump. You know, I always say that waste will flow from a country with strict legislation and strict enforcement of legislation to a country with weak enforcement of legislation. And for many African countries, they don't have waste legislation to protect them. They don't necessarily have the capacity and the infrastructure, the technology at ports to monitor what is coming in every shipload. And so this is a concern, and it's something that we do need to keep on the radar.
For those countries in Africa, Linda, that are being targeted for now, who are the culprits that are responsible for this illegal dumping there, and how are they doing it? How are they getting away with it?
It's a very good question that I think, you know, some of it is formal, some of it is informal and illegal. We know that there's a global illegal trade in waste and secondary resources. And I think certainly as we face more scarcity in resources in the future, this is going to become even more and more of a global trade. So some of it is actually leaking in under the disguise of formal donations to these countries, you know, supposedly workable computers that are donated to NGOs, but in fact really is just waste that is being scrapped. We see that there's leakage within some of the extended producer responsibility systems within Europe, where producers are paying for the safe disposal of those products at end of life, but they're disappearing into perhaps illegal routes and ending up in Africa. So there are a lot of different ways that this ends up. I think, you know, we do have the checks and balances in South Africa, which is very encouraging. Anybody that wants to import waste into South Africa has to go through certain channels, for example, through ITAC and import controls. But if someone is going to do this illegally, you know, I think there are always potential routes and gaps in the system that would allow them to do that.
So are we well-equipped, then, you say, are we well-equipped to actually prevent this from happening on our waters? I mean, I just see a while back we managed to stop a Ukrainian ship that discharged sewage, and they were given 2 fines, and that was totaling almost 3 million rand. Are we well-equipped, and are these measures, things like fines, 3 million rand, I beg your pardon, I think, is that enough to stop them, or to be preventative?
Well, I think that we do have systems in place. I would say perhaps more so than many of our neighbouring countries on the continent. You know, we are signatory to the Basel Convention for the transboundary movement of hazardous waste. Plastic has now just been added to the Basel Convention. So there are certain processes, procedures that people need to go through if they want to import. We do have systems at our ports. But, you know, certainly I think that there is opportunity to ramp that up. We do have monitoring of what's happening in our coastal waters. We have the green scorpions. So, as I said, we do have a lot of these checks and balances in place. But I think that, you know, given the fact that there's this diversion, it's something that we really need to look at very seriously in terms of, do we have enough on the ground to protect us as a country?
Well, thanks very much for that. That's Linda Godfrey. She's from the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, the CSIR, just chatting to us about whether South Africa is equipped enough to prevent the illicit dumping of waste coming in from other countries.